Welcome to Pieces of China, which tells the story of China one object at a time. I'm Dinda Elliott, the Director of Programs at China Institute, and we are thrilled today to welcome Aurelia Campbell, who is a professor in the Department of Art History, and Film at Boston College. Aurelia's work focuses on architecture and material culture of the Yuan, Ming, and Qing periods in China. And she also wrote a book called What the Emperor Built: Architecture and Empire in the Early Ming. And today we're going to talk about the Yongle Emperor, who reigned China from 1402 to 1424. He got a lot done in those 20 years. So Aurelia, welcome. Please join us on screen and we'll start our conversation.
Okay, thank you,
Hi,
Dinda.
Aurelia. Welcome. Good to have you
Hi,
here.
thanks.
So Aurelia, tell us a little bit about the Yongle Emperor and why he's important in Chinese history. From what I've read, he was a pretty ruthless fellow who came to power through lots of bloody machinations, right? And he's also known as this, by some anyway, as the kind of usurper. But tell us about the Yongle Emperor and how he's remembered.
Okay, well, yes, he was a great usurper. So he was the fourth son of the first emperor of the Ming dynasty, who was named Zhuyuanzhang. And Zhuyuanzhang had many sons, I think at least 10 sons that he enfeoffed all around in different kingdoms all around the country. And he, I guess, made the mistake of enfeoffing Yongle as the Prince of Yan in what is now Beijing. But right before the Ming dynasty, it had served as the capital of the Yuan dynasty. It was known as Dadu, and the Yuan dynasty was ruled by the Mongols. So Yongle even lived in the former Mongol palace for around 2 decades, which I always feel like must have given him a kind of inflated sense of power or grandeur.
Mm.
So due to the rules of inheritance, when Zhuyuanzhang died, his eldest son inherited the throne, but that son passed away before he became emperor. So that son's son, or Zhuyuanzhang's grandson, ended up becoming emperor. Well, Yongle did not like that his nephew was on the throne. So not long, just a few years after that son had become emperor, Yongle started a civil war against him and ended up burning the capital was in Nanjing at the time, and he ended up burning the Nanjing palaces, likely killing his nephew, though his nephew's body was never found. So that haunted Yongle forever. And then he took control of the throne and moved the capital up to Beijing.
Wow. Okay. So at the same time as he seems to have been somewhat ruthless, he did a lot of great things. Your book is called What the Emperor Built, devoted to the architectural projects of the Yongle Emperor. So what was Yongle's role in the construction of the Forbidden City, which recently, by the way, celebrated its 600th anniversary? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Forbidden City was first constructed under Yongle. Everybody should be aware that it wasn't called the Forbidden City until a bit later, a couple centuries later or something, by the end of the Ming. But at that time, it was just his imperial palace. So I had just mentioned that after he usurped the throne from his nephew, he moved the capital up north, up back to Beijing, and started building his palaces. So he tore down the former Yuan dynasty palaces and built his new, palatial estate directly on top of them. So that is now known as the Forbidden City. It became the residence for the emperors of the Ming and Qing dynasties for the rest of dynastic history. So that is up until the early 20th century.
Wow.
Very few of the buildings, and only some small scale buildings, actually date to the Yongle reign, because as you can see there, well, it's hard to see, but they're built out of wood. They have ceramic tile roofs, but they're built with timber frames, so easily flammable and also get damaged in earthquakes. So most of the Forbidden City has been rebuilt by this time, but the main contours like the moat and the gate and the location of the main halls all date
Let's
to
look at
Yongle.
that map. Yeah, there we go. So
Yeah, so you can see the
okay.
moat there. The main entrance, this is oriented to the right, but the main entrance is that U-shaped building far at the right. And all the position of those main buildings along the central axis are all from his reign. I mean,
Right.
the
And the
position of
general
it.
and the general kind of layout is essentially what it was back then? I mean, it was
More or
pretty.
less. Modifications have been made
Yeah.
here and there.
Uh-huh.
The Qianlong member of the Qing dynasty, for instance, knocked down some stuff and put in some gardens, but
Yes.
yes, the basic layout is the same.
Right. We did a program recently about the Qianlong Garden, but yeah.
Okay.
Um, so and did this take years and years to complete? What was the process of building?
That's a good question. According to historical records, it only took a few years, which is 4 years or something, which has kind of shocked people. But in reality, Yongle was gathering all the construction materials, and even, I mean, not him himself, but having, millions of conscripted workers gather the construction materials, prepare the bricks and the ceramic roof tiles, fabricate the components of the timber frame buildings. So the actual construction was more like assembling everything on
Wow.
site. And that's what took 4 years. But the preparations extended almost a decade
Okay.
before that.
Okay. And when you say millions, is that a turn of phrase or do you literally mean millions? I mean, any sense
Well,
of how many workers worked on this?
it's hard to gauge an accurate number, but I think at least a million. Those that included everybody. The skilled craftsmen were much fewer in number, of course.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
yes, it was in the high hundreds of thousands, and probably more like a million, over a million.
Wow. And okay, so one of Yongle's lesser known commissions was the Golden Hall on Wudongshan.
Mhm.
So tell us about that project and what that says about the emperor.
Sure.
So
So
beautiful.
yeah, I know it's really beautiful. So he, at the same
Oh, by
time
the
that
way, where is it? Which province is it
it's
in?
in Hubei province,
Okay.
which is kind of in the center of the country.
Hmm.
So at the same time that he was rebuilding or building the capital in Beijing, including his palace, which became known as the Forbidden City, he was also rebuilding or building for the first time a bunch of Daoist temples on a mountain range called Wudang in central China, as I just mentioned.
Mhm.
So the reason he was doing this is because this mountain was associated with a deity called Zhenwu. And Zhenwu is a Taoist deity with whom Yongle had a very close, or claimed to have a close personal
Let's
connection.
take a look at that image. I think we've
Yeah,
got
I
it.
think
There we go. Yep.
here's Zhenwu, or a statue of Zhenwu. So Yongle had claimed that this deity helped him in his usurpation of the throne. Obviously, this is all fabricated somewhere along the line. But Yongle said, as soon as I have the means to, I will rebuild all of these temples dedicated to Zhenwu on Mount Wudang. So
Uh-huh.
two things. First, the temples had first been built in the Yuan dynasty, but they had been destroyed over time, and especially in the Yuan Ming transition. And second of all, Zhenwu was closely associated with Wudang because that was where he was said to have practiced Taoism, and reached enlightenment. So that golden hall that we just saw, and I have a closer up image here, was constructed on the highest peak of the mountain, it's a very tall mountain, very huge mountain. This isn't just some small hill or something. So this is a really interesting building because it's made of copper, but it's constructed as if it were a timber building. So all those component parts are prefabricated, cast separately, and they were cast in Nanjing, in the southern capital, and then shipped to the mountain, carried up the mountain in individual parts, and then also assembled on site. So
Good
this
God.
is an
Wow.
extraordinary effort.
So can we actually visit this place?
Yes, you can. This is a
How
photograph of
hard
my
is it, how hard is it to get up to the top there?
easy. Well, it depends on how you do it. It's a huge pilgrimage site and a huge tourist site now. Now they have buses and you can stay on the top of the mountain, and now they have a what are those called? Those chairlift things.
Trolley type of thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can only think of the Chinese word, but those cars, those things that take you up to the top, and so it's quite accessible. But if you try to do the pilgrimage, it takes days and days. I mean, it's
Wow.
a really long, a really tall and arduous process.
So tell us a little bit, what's so special about the construction of these buildings? There's some of the oldest, I mean, you said this is not made of wood, but the Forbidden City, of course, some of the oldest wooden structures in China today. And the construction materials, Nanmu, where did that come from? Why was that so special? What's the architectural legacy?
Well, this building we're looking at, as you mentioned, is special because it's made in copper, but almost all the other buildings in Beijing, not on Mount Wudang, were constructed out of a material called nanmu. So what you're looking at here is the only surviving building from the Yongle reign that uses nanmu. And this is not in the Forbidden City, but rather it's a tomb, it's a hall for making sacrifices at his tomb.
Wow. Is that outside of Beijing?
It's just north of Beijing.
I
You can
mean,
visit there
right.
too.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So you can see how huge the trunks are in this image. You can see 4 girls, wrapping their arms around one of these trunks. So these grew in the southwest of China in old growth forests, over 1,000 kilometers from Beijing. And Yongle sought these materials out in particular because they were the thickest and tallest columns he could find. So this is a very special wood. Columns of this size take hundreds of years to grow, and or the trees to produce columns of size take hundreds of years to grow. And in the Yongle reign, they were pretty abundant because he was the first emperor to collect these. But after he built his capital out of these great timbers, he set this imperial precedent where subsequent emperors would also felt obliged to construct their great halls out of nanmu. So it became this kind of imperial standard for construction material. So at this point, they're all deforested.
Right. And now
You
it's
can't
very,
find-
very rare. Yeah.
Very, very rare to find trees this size.
Yeah.
But he gathered them by the hundreds of thousands and built
Wow.
his whole imperial palaces in them. With them.
Amazing. And can't even imagine what the transport of these huge trees was like coming from China's south up to Beijing.
Yeah, it took years. They floated them down the waterways.
So in this very short conversation, which is so fascinating, we definitely have to get you back to have a longer conversation about this.
Sure.
But Yongle seemed, he seemed very interested in his legacy through the Forbidden City and the Wudang temples. He also exercised a really totalitarian form of power. I mean, I read that when he first took over, he killed the Confucian scholars who were in Nanjing and their families before he moved to the palace to Beijing, et cetera. So I'm really curious, reflecting on his history and his legacy. What can we learn? What can we learn about China today from his major projects and his ruling style?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right that he was very interested in his legacy. So during his lifetime, he really was concerned with trying to prove that he had the mandate to rule, almost obsessed with it. And that included how he would be remembered after he died. So unfortunately, he did have a very kind of totalitarian rule, but it resulted in a lot of great cultural legacies, like the architectural projects I describe in my book, and this massive encyclopedia, which was the largest encyclopedia in the world until it was recently surpassed by Wikipedia. So that's just to name a couple of his grand cultural projects. So I think a parallel with today is, or something I thought of is, with this kind of these top-down orders, a lack of red tape, and so much manpower, it's very easy to, or we see in China in the Yongle reign as well as today, large-scale construction projects being able to be completed very quickly. So for instance, a city I used to live in the early 2000s in China, I visited recently. I visited 2 years ago, and it was completely unrecognizable. Just a totally new city had been built. And this is true.
That was Ningbo, right?
That's in Ningbo, yeah, in the southeast of China, but it's true all over. It's very hard. Cities are changing so rapidly, and there's so much new construction that you can hardly recognize, some of these, not just parts of cities, but the whole cities themselves. So I see this as a parallel with the past in how much, how these massive projects were able to be erected quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, fascinating. The idea that so much can get done so quickly. And,
Mhm.
you know, thankfully, not quite as ruthlessly
Right.
today as it was back then. But yeah, so Aurelia, thank you so much. In that brief 15 minutes, you've given us an incredible tour of
Mhm.
history and also shared some beautiful images with us. So we're really grateful for that.
Yes, no problem.
And I want to thank you and thank the audience for joining us. And please, please join as members, because if you join as a member, you are helping us bring brilliant speakers like Aurelia Campbell to our stage. So please do join. And just to share the breadth of what we're presenting in the next several weeks. Next week, we've got a wonderful program about the roots of anti-Asian hate. We're looking at history, the rise of China, and the roots of bias in America, with some really wonderful, some historians speaking, putting it in historical context. So we hope you'll join for that. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to have Janet Yang. Our next Pieces of China is going to be Janet Yang, Hollywood producer, who's going to talk about a little tiny Wang Kuping sculpture that she got back in the 80s and how it launched her on a journey of filmmaking. So thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Aurelia. You have really helped us tell the story of China. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Take care.